Hey everyone, I'm Liz Ferry and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. I just got the Lotus Bra pattern on Etsy. I'll link the pattern for you guys in the description below. So I'm going to be taking y'all along on the ride as I, through trial and error, try to make this pattern work for my body type. In this video, I'll show you the first couple of mock-ups that I made, and then in my next project diary, I'll show you the final result. I'm actually wearing the bra that I made under this shirt right now, but you'll have to wait to see it until the next video. Before we begin though, I just wanted to acknowledge that, as you guys may have noticed, I haven't posted in a while. That's because I've had some medical issues over the past few months that have made filming and editing difficult. Hopefully that's something that's about to change, but one of the ways I thought I could make it easier on myself to make content for you all is to show you guys my sewing project, which realistically I'll be working on anyway because I love sewing. So I thought it would be nice to share those projects here. So without further ado, let's begin the project. First, I'm going to make a copy of the pattern. I don't have ink in my printer or time to go to a print shop, so I have opted for the very sophisticated method of scaling the pattern to the right size on my computer monitor, then taping down a piece of printer paper and manually copying the pattern onto the paper. This obviously wouldn't work very well with a larger pattern, but I made it work with this bra pattern since the pieces are pretty small. Okay, so I finished cutting out the pattern, and I have the cup pieces here. The cradle piece seems to fit pretty much perfectly, so I'm going to just leave that as it is. And I am going to go ahead and test out this bra cup, but I suspect that it's going to be way too big. I cut out this size because this is the size that the pattern seemed to want me to cut out, just using their system of determining what my size is. But what I think is going to happen, and this happens to me every time that I make something that fits over my chest, is that it's going to end up way too pointy in the tip of the bust. This always happens to me, and you might not think that this looks very pointy at all, but maybe it won't be, but we'll see. But I suspect that this is going to be very, 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 very pointy on me specifically, because this happens to me pretty much with everything, and just judging by the look of it, it looks like it's going to be pretty pointy. So I'm going to go ahead and cut out a cup of this bra and stitch it together along this curved seam. And then I'm just going to go ahead and test fit that over my bust and see how pointy or not pointy it is, or how much excess fabric there is that is not supposed to be there. And then at that point we can decide whether I should just cut a different bra cup, or if I should just basically cut off the tips of these pieces, kind of like that, so that the shape of the bust is just a little bit more rounded. Alright, I finished cutting out the outer and the inner cups, and I lined them up at the bust point. Now I'm just going to pin these up and stitch them together, and then I'll stitch the inner cups together, and then we can see just how pointy this middle section is going to be. But I suspect it's going to be too pointy, so we'll see how things turn out. Okay, I've sewn the cups together for the first mock-up, and as you can probably tell, it's very, very pointy, just as I thought it was going to be. If I clipped and pressed it, it might be less pointy, but it's definitely too pointy for me. It fits around the cup pretty well, but it's just... the front of the cup is just empty. There's nothing in there. This happens to me a lot with things that are supposed to be fitted around the bust, so I think this is more of a me problem than a problem with the pattern, but it just has to do with how my body is shaped. But yeah, there's nothing in there. It's just a little empty triangle at the tip of the bust. So I'm going to flip this the other way, and I'm going to pin out that excess to make it fit more to my shape, so that I can see how much I need to adjust the pattern. That looks a lot better, so I'm going to go ahead and take that off, and use the pinned out area as my guide to adjust the pattern to my size and shape. Alright, so now I'm going to make some alterations to my patterns. I want to keep the original pattern as it is, just so that I can really just see what the difference is between the original pattern and what I end up with in the end. So I'm actually going to make a new copy of the pattern. I'm just going to trace around the pattern pieces that I've already made, make any alterations that I need to make to the new copies that I'm tracing right now. There was the problem of the bust being a little too pointed, so I am going to make that alteration. But I also noticed that when I was looking at the video of just holding the cup up to my bust, I noticed that it looked like it was a little bit too big in a couple of other areas too. So I'm just going to go ahead and take those parts in. Alright, now that I have my new shape for my cup that I want to try, I'm going to make the other side, the outer cup, match on all the sides where it's going to be sewn together. So I'm going to need to take away the same amount that I took away from the bottom here. So right there, I'm going to need to take away the same amount from the front right here. So there. And now I also need to take off the same amount as I took off for this piece here. So to do that, I think I'm just going to cut this piece off and then use it to sort of trace that off of the other piece. But first I have to make a new copy of this so that I can mark all those points. Okay, so my camera died while I was in the middle of doing this, but this is what I ended up with. You can see the difference between the original cup shape and the new shape that I'm going with, and they are a lot smaller. So I suspect that maybe it would have been easier if I had used a smaller cup from the pattern, but it was just a little tough to figure out which cup was supposed to be the right size. And these new shapes don't really match any of the other sizes on the pattern anyway, because of the flattening of the bust that I had to do. Just every size really does have this very very angled, very pointy bust shape, and that just doesn't really work for my body type. So regardless of what size I used, I probably would have had to flatten the bust, so I think this is fine. So I'm just going to cut out a new version of the inner and outer cup using this size piece and see how that goes. Alright, I finished mocking that up again. I did those adjustments, and now let's check the fit. Now that is a little bit more promising. Seems to fit pretty well. So now I just have to try it with the cradle piece, the straps, and the back wing piece. And hopefully we'll get a pretty good fit from this. Although I am noticing that it's puffing up a little bit at the middle still, so maybe it will be pulled across more with the straps and everything so that it's sitting better, but might need to do another little bit of adjusting over the bust. So I just finished with test fitting the cups, and I think that they look pretty good, but I have a limited amount of this fabric, and I really want this to work, so I think I'm actually going to set this aside for now and just actually test fit this using a different fabric that I have, just to make absolutely sure before I cut a bunch of this up that I have the fit right, because I would really like for this to work with this fabric because I just like it. So I'm gonna switch to another fabric, cut out a new copy of the cups, and then I'm also going to actually cut out a copy of everything instead of just the cups like I've been doing so far. And then I'm gonna go ahead and test that with just a random fabric that I have a bunch of that I don't care about, and we'll see how that goes. And then once I've got that fit really well, I think I'll just move back to using this fabric that I think is cute. So I'm gonna go do that. I didn't get much video of putting together the first mock-up, since I figured it wasn't going to fit properly anyway, but I will go into more detail for the next one, since the process is pretty much the same. Okay, I finished with this mock-up. I did the whole bra. I kind of fudged it when I was doing this gothic arch thing. I ended up doing it differently because I didn't really know what I was doing. Lots of things went wrong with this mock-up. You can see there's some stains on it, but it was really just to see how it went, and I'm going to show you what it looks like on in just a moment. Okay, so I finished with the first mock-up, and it looks pretty good, but I'm still noticing a few issues. I'm not sure what the causes of all of them are, but I definitely think these straps are just way too long. If I take them in by a couple of inches, it's hard to say if that will definitely solve all of the issues with the fit. It'll probably solve most of them. So you can see right here, when I lift up my arms, a little bit of the cup pops up away from my body at the top here. So even though I already cut away a bunch of the material from the middle of the cup, it looks like I'm going to have to remove even more fullness from there, at least from here at the top. It still looks pretty good, and it's definitely wearable, so I am happy about that. I think I'm going to try some of these fixes and see if they work with another mock-up. I used the same method as before, pinning out the excess and copying that as best as I could onto a new copy of the paper pattern. Then I cut out all the pieces with another fabric. This fabric is a lightweight rayon, so I opted to flatline the pieces onto some plain cotton to make them easier to work with. Alright, I just finished interlining all of the pieces by zigzag stitching 2 layers together. So now I just need to sew all of the pieces of the outer fabric and the liner together and then connect them and add my hardware. And the second mock-up is done. Alright, I finished sewing the cups together. Next, I'm going to sew the cradle down to the bottom of the cups. You can kind of see where it goes here. So I finished pinning on the cradle to the cups, and as you can see, I'm using 1,000 pins because of how curvy this seam is. So hopefully I don't get any puckering in the seam, but I think I've got all of my pins placed in a way where, at least at the seam line, everything is straight and aligned properly. I do have some wrinkling down here and up here at the top, but that shouldn't get caught in the seam line because of where I have everything pulled tight and straightened out. So I'm going to sew this. I'm going to sew this down with a 1/4 inch of seam allowance, and hopefully we won't get any puckering. But if so, I can always just go over that little area again. But let's go ahead and sew the cups to the cradle. Okay, so I finished sewing the cradle onto the bottom of both the liner and the outer fabric. Now I'm about to sew on the back wings, but something that I noticed that I just wanted to bring up about this pattern is that kind of no matter what I do, the edge of the cups always ends up not a straight edge. That's how the pattern seemed to just work up. It just wasn't straight, so I just have to have a little bit of extra of the side of the cups just kind of sticking out at the edge here. I'm not really sure if that's just me not lining things up properly to where it's not ending up as a straight angle, but that happened with the last mock-up, and it happened with this one. I did try to fix it, and it's way less bad than it was the first time, but still not quite straight, so I'm not sure exactly what I have to do to fix that. I guess just change the angle of where these two seams on the cup and the cradle come together. And then the other thing that, again, I tried to fix it, and it is a little better than it was, but still not fixed, is right here at the center front, where the cradle and the cups meet, is this little flappy bit here that isn't quite lining up. It was way worse last time when I just made the pattern as it goes together. I'm not exactly sure what that is. I guess maybe it could be just me sewing the cradle down wrong. But it does just press really nice and flat, so I assume that's where it's supposed to line up. But it just doesn't seem to want to quite line up there when I sew it with a 1/4 inch of seam allowance. I didn't really alter the cradle well, at least with the first mock-up, I didn't really alter the cradle at all. I changed it a little bit to try to fix that, but it didn't quite fix it. It just made it a little less flappy. So I'm not exactly sure what the issue with that is. Again, it could just be me sewing the cradle down wrong or something like that. But it does press nicely, so I could just hand stitch that down later. It happened exactly the same way on both sides too. So you can see here is the outer fabric, and here's the little flappy bit that folds over in the center. So I'm not sure exactly what that is, but I mean, it's an easy thing to fix. But anyway, I'm just going to stitch these together and also to stitch on the straps. Alright, I've pretty much finished the whole thing, sewing all of the pieces of the liner and the outer fabric together, and now I have the liner and the outer fabric pinned together along the top. So, next I'm just going to sew along the top, along this side here, up to the top of the strap, and then I'm going to stop here, leave that bottom part open, and then continue along the inside of the strap and the neckline. And then I'll do the same thing on the other side so that I can flip this around and have this seam be finished. And here at the corner, I've sandwiched in between the little strip of elastic that has the metal loop on it inside, so that when I finish the seam, it will sew that loop into place on each corner. And I'm just going to make sure that I go really slowly around this area so that I don't hit that little bit of metal that's on the inside. Alright, I'm almost done now. I just sewed along the top line and then flipped it the other way. And I ended up changing how I had these put in. I put them like where they were lined up with just this side, but really it should have been lined up with the middle, so I have it popping right out the middle now. Then I turned this side of the strap in and stuck the other side of the strap into it. So next I have to add some elastic along the top of the neckline and the underarms, and then I have to do the bottom. As you can see, the bottom I have not sewn together yet, and that's because I'm going to finish it in a slightly different way than I normally would. If I was doing liner, I would normally just, sew the two sides together and then flip it out the other way. But I'm going to have the elastic on the bottom since this is a bralette. So I'm just going to finish the edge by stitching the elastic on and then flipping it towards the back. So I'm just going to pin the elastic in and then I'll show you how I'm going to do that. Okay, so now I've tacked on the elastic to one side with a couple of inches of overlap at the front, and I added the elastic by just stretching it into place and pinning it down where it laid after stretching it. So while I'm actually sewing it, I'm going to have to stretch it out so that it sticks down to the fabric. So I need to sew this down and stop right here at the middle. This is the very, very center. You can see the center front seam is right here. So I've lined this up with where it aligns with the center of the bottom piece. So I'm going to sew from the back to the front here and stop right there. The other thing is I'm using this picot elastic that has a brushed back, So I also have the picots facing towards the top of the bra and the brushed side facing up and out and the smooth side facing inside towards the fabric, so that when I stitch this down and flip it out, the picots will be at the bottom and the brushed side will be at the back on the skin where it's meant to be. So just make sure that you're doing that if you're doing something like this. Alright, I sewed on the first piece of elastic using a zigzag stitch, and I sewed it pretty close to the edge and stopped sewing it on at the center. Then I pinned on the second piece of elastic in the same way, but mirrored on the other side. And now I'm going to do the same thing, sew this one onto the other side and stop at the middle so that these two are just free floating at the front. Alright, so I finished sewing the elastic on both sides, and now this is what we have. They both finish at the center point. I'm going to flip this in here so that I can stitch it down, but as you can see, this raw edge is kind of sticking up just a little tiny bit. So before I do that, I'm going to trim this down a little so that when I flip this over, it will not show and have a nicely finished edge. And then the other thing that I'm going to do is, to finish the Gothic arch, I'm going to clip into the fabric here at the center where the two stitching lines meet, only into the fabric, not the elastic. The elastics I will leave as they are, and only down to the line of stitching, not go past the line of stitching that I just made. So I'm just going to clip right down the middle and make sure that I'm holding the elastic out of the way while I do this. I'm going to go right down the middle and not clip past the seam line. And now these have a little bit more ability to move, so theoretically now when I turn this under, I should be able to get them to lie nice and flat right on top of each other, and they should cross nicely in the back. So, once I've got these flipped under and crossed, I'm going to do another pass of stitching so that I stitch these down right here along the top until the point where they would cross with the line of the bra cup, and then I'm just going to clip the excess after I've sewn them down. And I'm going to do the same thing to the other side and get that into that seam line of the bra cup. Maybe I'll just add some bias tape or something there just to cover the ends of the elastic and to give it a little bit more of a cup shape to the structure of it. First, I'm going to go ahead and trim off this edge of fabric. Again, not the elastic. I'll leave the elastic as it is. And I'm going to trim off the fabric just a little, not cutting through any of the stitching or anything. So I'm just going to trim this off so that when I fold it over, it has a nice finish and covers up all of the raw edges. Alright, so I sewed down one side, and then I flipped over and pinned down the other side, mirrored to what I just did. And you can faintly kind of see the stitch line right there. So, theoretically, when this is done, there'll be a cross of stitching going down both sides. So let's stitch that together. Alright, so I finished adding the Gothic arches. I'm not sure if you can hear in the background, Joey's washing a couple of dishes and making coffee, so sorry about if you can hear that. But anyway, I finished with the Gothic arches, and you can see that they are sewn down to where the underwire seam would go. And it says that I should use channeling to cover it up, and I don't actually have any of that. So, I might just use bias tape or something like that just to cover that seam up to tuck in those ends. And I wasn't going to do this because I thought I didn't have enough of the elastic left, but turns out that I did. So I added some elastic to the neckline and the arms, and I figured that I'd better actually just tuck it into where the straps meet. So I opened that back up and tucked that in. Same thing with this one. I actually unpicked the seam and tucked that elastic in there so that it doesn't show on the outside. But yeah, everything is really close to being finished now at this point. So, now I just have to sew that elastic on, and then figure out what to do about all this channeling situation. Alright, so I've pretty much finished with the whole bra now. I've added some elastic to the top and to the armholes, and then of course the elastic at the bottom, and we have the Gothic arch here. Now I'm just going to add the channeling. I've already pinned it on. I don't have any actual channeling, so I'm just using bias tape for this that is the same as my liner fabric. The liner fabric that I'm using is a flannel, so it's got a nice soft texture, so that'll be more comfortable on the inside. So I just basically pinned this bias tape down around the seam of the cup. And I've only pinned down one side. I'm going to stitch that down from the other side. So in order to make sure that I do that well, I'm just going to actually baste this with, I'm going to actually baste this by hand sewing it. And then I'll put it through the machine on the opposite side just by stitching in the line of the seam so that it's not visible. And then I'm going to flip this around and hand stitch it down to finish the seam on the other side. So first I'm just going to hand baste this down. Alright, I finished sewing on one side of the bias to the spot where the channeling goes. I just stitched in the ditch here. You can kind of see the seam line if I pull it open a little bit, but it's mostly not visible. But, now I'm just gonna trim away this excess fabric and then fold this over and stitch it down just to the liner. I'm also gonna trim away that little extra bit of elastic that's gonna be sticking out from the top, so that it has a nicely finished edge. Alright, I finished pinning this in, so that's where the channeling ended up. I clipped that extra little bit of the elastic that was sticking out, folded it over, and pinned it all in place. The other thing that I did was I trimmed that end and then just tucked it underneath the end of the elastic, and then I just did a quick little hand stitch to connect those together so that the end is tucked away. I did that on both sides. So, next I'm going to just hand sew this down, tacking it just to the lining so that it doesn't show on the front. And then the other thing that I have to do is to sew on the hook and eye closure that I got. I pinned it on. I'm just going to hand sew it because it would probably just be easier than trying to wrestle this under the machine. So I'm just going to go ahead and do all of that handwork. So I finished sewing on the back clasp by hand, and now the whole bra is finished. So now my second mock-up is complete. There's still a couple of other fit issues though. The straps are definitely still a little too long, so I'm going to have to shorten them even more. And I'm still getting a tiny amount of popping out at the top middle of the cup. This time it's just a tiny bit, so I think I'm just going to take in each side of the cup by like 1/4 of an inch on each side. I also still got a lot of popping out here at the middle of the cradle where the cups meet. I've gotten this with every version of this pattern, so I don't know if that's the pattern or maybe just my alterations at the bottom of the cups, just warping the shape and making it so that it doesn't lie flat. So I'm going to try all of these fixes in my next mock-up, where I'm finally going back to that pink floral fabric. That's going to have to wait until next week though, so this video doesn't end up insanely long. Let me know what you think about how this project is going, and also let me know what other Etsy patterns you think I should try in the comments. If you'd like to support me in making more videos, consider donating to my Patreon at patreon.com/fairyrings to see my videos early and ad-free. If you found this video helpful, press the like button and share it on social media. If you want to contact me, you can DM me on Instagram at LizFairy. And if you want to see more projects from me in the future, subscribe to my channel. That's all I have for you today, so I'm off to finish these bra mock-ups. See you all next time. Bye!
Hi. How you doing? You playing with your zip tie? What a little cutie. What a beautiful boy.